Welcome back to Tales in the Dark, where real-life experiences become chilling tales. In Story 2, we follow a medical examiner whose disbelief in the supernatural is shattered by a haunting encounter. After a routine case, a man he thought he'd never see again reappears, leaving behind whispers, eerie footsteps, and a presence that refuses to let go. Prepare yourself for the man from the gas station. And if stories like these keep you on the edge, remember to like, subscribe, and hit the notification bell. Now, let's step into the dark. Story 2. The Medical Examiner and the Man at the Gas Station. My parents migrated to the United States from Thailand in the 1980s and settled in the upper Midwest. I was born and raised in a somewhat superstitious household, but I consider myself an atheist and never believed in the superstitions my parents tried to instill in me. While I understood the importance of the religious teachings I was exposed to, they felt more like stories to me than anything real. Growing up, I was always fascinated by the unknown. I didn't believe in the supernatural, but the ideas, the creativity, and the wild imagination captivated me. My love for horror movies began early, with Freddy Krueger in A Nightmare on Elm Street being my first taste of terror. I devoured other horror films like Friday the 13th, Hellraiser, and Poltergeist, watching them over and over. While my siblings crouched in fear, hiding their faces, I immersed myself in the experience. I wasn't scared, just extremely curious, eager to see what would happen next. I'd even laugh at scenes where characters tripped while running away or hid in the most obvious places. Instead of fear, I felt frustration, wondering why not just fight the monster? Why hide in such a predictable spot? I always considered myself fearless and bold when it came to things that scared others. I wasn't afraid of the dark, creepy basements or graveyards. They were simply resting places for the dead, part of the natural cycle of life. Though I loved horror movies, I had no interest in proving the existence of the supernatural, nor did I seek out validation for my belief that none of it existed. After high school, I chose a career in healthcare, but not in the way my parents expected. They had hoped I would become a family physician, but I pursued a path as a medical examiner, a forensic pathologist. To them, working with the dead was unsettling, even taboo. But I was fascinated by the idea of solving mysteries, much like the thrillers I grew up watching. Performing autopsies to uncover the truth behind someone's death excited me. After graduation, I secured a job as a medical examiner at a hospital close to my apartment. The salary was generous, and my family celebrated my success. They were proud but continued to question my career choice, haunted by the idea that a spirit might follow me home or harm me. I reassured them, insisting I didn't believe in such superstitions. To me, ghosts and the supernatural were as real as Santa Claus, complete fantasy. I recalled staying in so-called haunted family homes, where my cousins would share ghost stories, but I had never experienced anything supernatural. Not once. Over time, I developed a ritual while performing examinations. I'd greet the deceased by name before beginning and say goodbye when I was finished. There were moments when it felt unsettling, being alone with the body, but I always maintained a clinical perspective. Like any job, it could be overwhelming, especially after long hours, but I had never questioned my career, until the day I encountered a body from a horrific car accident. That morning, my supervisor warned me we had received a body disfigured beyond recognition in an especially brutal car accident. I didn't think much of it at the time and went about my routine, but when I lifted the cover off the body, I froze. The face, twisted and mangled, was something out of a nightmare. My years of training and experience vanished in an instant. My body locked up, my knees went weak, and a flood of anxiety rushed through me. I hurriedly covered the body and retreated to my office, barely able to think straight. I sat down, closed my eyes, and unexpectedly passed out from the sheer shock. When I awoke, a colleague was standing over me, and I explained what had happened. I felt embarrassed, ashamed that I couldn't continue the examination, but my colleagues were understanding. I took a leave of absence that day, but on the way home, the image of the disfigured face wouldn't leave my mind. Every time I closed my eyes, I could see it, clear as day. Eventually, I returned to my routine, though I now carried a small weight of anxiety. I sometimes found myself reliving that day, unable to shake the feeling that something had changed within me. A few weeks later, something strange happened. On my way to work, I stopped at a gas station, and a man, who looked to be in his 50s, approached my car. He knocked on the passenger window, startling me. He seemed confused, his eyes darting around, and he spoke with a sense of urgency. He told me he was looking for his family and didn't know where they had gone. I got out of my car to help him, but as I turned toward him, he was gone, vanished without a trace. I was left standing there, confused, but brushed it off, assuming he was just a lost homeless man. However, when I arrived at work, a familiar anxiety began creeping in. I tried to dismiss it as a remnant of my previous experience, but something felt off. By the end of my shift, I was finishing up my last examination. As I uncovered the body, my heart skipped a beat. The man's face on the table looked eerily familiar. I stood there, frozen, trying to remember where I had seen him before. And then it hit me, the man from the gas station. My blood ran cold. It was the same man. But how could this be? I had just seen him that morning, alive. My hands began trembling as fear surged through me. The room felt suffocatingly silent, and I could hear my heartbeat thudding in my ears. In disbelief, I covered the body again and walked back to my office, shaken. I didn't tell my colleagues. I didn't know how to explain it. After composing myself, I returned to complete the examination, but I couldn't shake the unease. When I approached the body again, I noticed the cover had shifted. I was certain I had covered him completely, yet it was now pulled back, revealing his chest. With my heart racing, I forced myself to finish the examination. By the time my shift ended, the feeling of being watched was overwhelming. As I walked to my car, the hallways were eerily quiet. Halfway to the parking lot, I began hearing faint footsteps behind me, growing faster. I stopped, turning to look. Nothing. But as I resumed walking, the footsteps grew louder, closer, as if someone was following me. Panic seized me, and I hurried toward the door. The moment I stepped outside, I broke into a full sprint, racing to my car. The drive home was unbearable. The dark, empty road seemed to stretch endlessly, cloaked in an oppressive silence. I couldn't shake the feeling that someone, or something, was sitting in the car with me, just out of sight. Every shadow felt heavier, every turn more foreboding. I thought the nightmare might finally be over as I pulled into my apartment parking lot. But just as I shifted into park, a sudden, sharp knock echoed against the passenger window. My heart leapt into my throat. I whipped my head around. There was no one there. The window was empty, dark. I sat frozen, my breath shallow, my pulse racing. Had I brought something back with me from the hospital? Something that wasn't ready to let go? That night, I couldn't sleep. I lay in bed, wide-eyed, convinced that someone was in the room with me, watching me, waiting for me to close my eyes. The air felt thick with an unseen presence. Every creak of the house, every rustle of the wind outside, felt like footsteps creeping closer. A few days passed, and though I tried to resume my normal routine, nothing felt normal anymore. I started hearing footsteps behind me, always at a distance, never close enough to touch, but always near. At work, objects would randomly fall, papers fluttering to the ground, books dropping from shelves for no reason. My tools, which I knew were securely placed, would be found scattered across the floor when I wasn't looking. Occasionally, a cold breeze would brush across my shoulder, as if someone, or something, was standing just behind me, watching. Even worse, I began hearing a faint voice, a man's voice, whispering near my ear when I least expected it. At home, things became unsettling. Doors would creak open by themselves, slow and deliberate, as though someone was inching them open just to see how I'd react. Sometimes, late at night, I would hear soft footsteps pacing in my apartment, their presence lingering in the quiet, empty rooms. One weekend, exhausted from sleepless nights and the constant sense of dread, I finally drifted off to sleep. But peace didn't come. In my dreams, the man from the gas station appeared again. He stood before me, looking just as lost and confused as he had the first time. He told me he was searching for his family, desperate to find them. His voice trembled as he explained he didn't know where they were, or even where he was. I felt a chill of terror creep through me. I knew he was dead. I explained to him, trembling, that he had passed away, that I had examined his body at the hospital. He seemed confused at first, but then something shifted. His expression softened, and I could feel the weight of his realization. He walked away slowly, his figure fading into the distance, his sadness heavy in the air. When I returned to work, I overheard my colleagues talking about one of the recent deceased patients, the same man who had been haunting me. They discussed how his family had been in a car accident. His wife and 2 children were still alive, though they were in critical condition. As I sat there listening, it hit me. The reason he kept asking about his family was because they were still alive and he was lost, unable to find them in death. But why had he attached himself to me? Why had I become the one to bear his confusion and sadness? I never told my colleagues what had been happening to me. I was afraid they'd think I'd lost my mind, that I'd be ridiculed for believing in the impossible. Instead, I told my parents, and they took me to a temple to be blessed by monks for spiritual protection. The heavy weight of the haunting lifted after that. The intense, terrifying presence of the man faded, but the occasional paranormal disturbances continued. Objects would still move on their own. A cold breeze would sometimes sweep across my skin, and I'd feel that same presence lurking in the corners of empty rooms. I never spoke of it again, and I've learned to ignore the smaller, lingering signs. My perspective has changed. I'm no longer so quick to dismiss the supernatural, but I try not to dwell on it. Some things are better left alone. As we close the chapter on this chilling tale, we're reminded that even the most rational minds can be shaken when faced with the unknown. For the medical examiner, this experience left him grappling with questions far beyond his training. Perhaps, when lives end suddenly, some spirits become lost, unaware of their own death, reaching out to the living for guidance. These encounters reveal how little we truly understand about the mysteries that lie beyond. If you've enjoyed these spine-chilling stories and crave more tales that explore the thin line between reality and the unknown, be sure to like this video, subscribe to our channel, and hit the notification bell. We have more unsettling stories coming your way, stories that will keep you up at night. Because in the dark, the unknown is always waiting.